Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Rubrik. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of the session or you'd like to share it with a friend, the on-demand will be made available to you today after the webinar concludes. If you look on the right side of your screen, you'll notice a couple tabs. The first one is the chat tab. This is where we want you to engage with one another as well as engage with our speakers. And if you have any questions to send in throughout the program, which we'll have plenty of time for Q&A today, so please send in your questions using that Q&A tab. We'll address as many as you can send in, so be sure to send them in early. And finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a giveaway for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's go ahead and kick off our presentation today. Our topic is protecting applications running on Kubernetes. And I'm joined today by Christina Avrianova, Principal Product Marketing Manager at Rubrik, and Rajni Sharma, Principal Product Manager at Rubrik. And it is my pleasure at this point in time to turn the floor over to them. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Cody, for that nice introduction. Hello, everybody. Raj and I are super excited to have you with us today as we begin to cover and talk about how do you protect your Kubernetes environment. Well, once upon a time, a developer will finish writing their code, then they will throw it over to the wall for IT to manage. And when the 3 a.m. pager call comes in, it was IT who had to deal with the issue. And when the inevitable what happened question got asked, quite often the developer would simply say, well, it worked on my machine, and this doesn't happen anymore, right? Well, we wish. The technology growth over the past few decades has been so big that even Moore's law couldn't keep up. The ability to deliver new products or services as a differentiator, or for some to simply stay in the game, has put pressure on businesses to modernize, transform, and innovate. We saw the rise of the agile methodology, DevOps practices, application proliferation, which in turn drove new infrastructure choices, all in the quest to meet customer expectations and increase operational efficiency. We saw the industry evolve from the monolithic applications and the wide adoption of virtual environments. We saw the rise of cloud and numerous open source solutions. And as organizations took advantage of the new technologies and processes, application deployment started crossing the traditional boundaries more and more often. But the application behavior was so different from one environment to another that the problem, well, it worked on my machine, became much more obvious and more frequent. So then came the containers. And containers gave developers the ability to create predictable environments. So now applications can be shuttled easily between the different environments, and the software was running reliably. So it gave them the much more needed agility and the freedom. They could make changes quickly and have the code in production in minutes, knowing it will behave properly. So containers are here to stay. And we can even say that they're the new virtual machines. At a recent Forrester report, it was revealed that 86% of technology leaders are planning to prioritize containers for more of their applications. And Kubernetes has become the de facto standard for container orchestration. And therefore, it has become yet another environment that needs protection. You need to be able to protect and recover your persistent volumes, aka the application data, and your Kubernetes objects, aka the application's configuration and the container image. But as you can imagine, Kubernetes protection presents unique challenges. The environment is very, very fluid. It's very dynamic. Containers' lifespan is very short, yet the data needs to be stored longer. If development teams do not get the expected results, they need to quickly change back to the previous good state. So manual job-centric backups are not a good fit for those dynamic Kubernetes environments. Traditional backup solutions do not support well, if at all, the distributed Kubernetes clusters that usually span data centers and clouds. And recovery needs to be not only fast, but flexible. Often you have to restore to a completely new cluster, not the original one. So yeah, to say the least, protecting Kubernetes environment is challenging. This is why we are very excited to introduce Rubrik Zero Trust Data Protection for Kubernetes, where you can expand simply the powerful, where you can simply expand the powerful capabilities of Rubrik to your Dynamics Kubernetes environment and protect your applications and data. But before we dive into the Kubernetes capabilities, let me tell you a little bit more about Rubrik. Our Zero Trust Data Management solution protects enterprise data from attacks and delivers the capabilities to reliably and rapidly recover applications so normal IT operations can be restored, so your business is restored. Here are the 5 fundamental capabilities of the Rubrik Zero Trust platform. First and foremost is the Zero Trust Data Protection. Here at Rubrik, we automate backups of all applications and data with a multi-cloud SLA policy engine. All data is encrypted and logically air-gapped from the rest of the environment, with all access governed by the comprehensive authentication and access controls. Ransomware investigation. This is how our platform provides the native ability to search for data anomalies and malicious encryption events, as well as determine the blast radius of an attack. With API-driven integration with source solutions, we give teams the understanding of when and where an attack begins with threat hunting capabilities. Sensitive data discovery. Rubrik ensures the post-incident reviews and cyber forensics investigations are conducted thoroughly with point-in-time snapshots while surfacing the risks of sensitive data exfiltration quickly. Incident containment. Rubrik operators can pause all access and activities in the event of a compromise or threat. This includes the ability to quarantine data so it does not reinfect the environment. And lastly, orchestrated application recovery. Rubrik provides expert-guided recovery post-attack using application blueprints and orchestrated recovery of workloads through integration with source solutions, such as the Palo Alto Network's Cortex, that enable teams to restore operations from the last known clean copy in minutes or hours rather than days or weeks. The Rubrik Zero Trust architecture meets the data security standards set forth by the US government as part of the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies. And all these data security services are delivered via a single unified platform across all your hybrid IT workloads. And now let's talk about Rubrik Kubernetes protection. So when we talked about protecting Kubernetes, we wanted to make sure that we can add incredible simplicity to the complexity of your Kubernetes environment. So again, the policy-centric approach will allow you to streamline protection of application and data. You can automate the protection of the persistent volumes and the Kubernetes objects with one SLA. Rubriks would index the metadata so you can search and granularly recover namespaces, individual persistent volumes, or specific files on the persistent volume, therefore making it easy to replicate snapshot from one Rubrik cluster to another and archive to the public cloud. All this is done via Rubrik SaaS Management Console. Again, this is a single SaaS platform that unifies the management and visibility and lets you protect, organize, and manage Kubernetes while having insights on SLA compliance and data availability. I think I've talked enough for a while. So why don't we see the cool demo of Rubrik in actions when it comes to protecting Kubernetes environments? Rajni, are you ready?
Thank you, Christina. All right, before we dive into demo, let's take a quick look at the application environment overview. As you can see, there are three blocks of application environment here. Here is where your main Kubernetes cluster is sitting. And what we introduce with Rubrik solution for Kubernetes protection is CDM appliance as a backup repository and the central control plane powered by Polaris, our SaaS solution. While you install the Kubernetes protection agent on cluster, what it does is it installs a lightweight Cooper client on your Kubernetes cluster. This client agent, what it does is it keeps polling the Kubernetes cluster for its latest and updated metadata information. It also creates an encrypted copy of the metadata file and constantly uploads to Polaris as a control plane. That way, we know our control plane is aware to the latest information, and it also keeps the protection scheme up to date with an upcoming SLA time slots. With that, let's dive into the demo environment to take a look at how does it really work.
Let's dive into the dashboard for management plane. This is SaaS-based management plane for Kubernetes protection. We can look into different workloads by clicking inventory. And there is one Kubernetes cluster here. Let's click further into it. It talks about the cluster name and the Rubrik CDM cluster is associated to. And it also mentions the version of Kubernetes we are running on this. If we go look further into it, it also lists all the namespaces, system level namespaces, application namespaces. To add a new cluster, all we need to do is click Manage Kubernetes Cluster and click Add New Cluster. Here we can add a new on-prem cluster. We click Ahead Next. What we really need to add as inputs here is cluster name, Rubrik CDM cluster name, IPs for the Kubernetes clusters, controller node port, and the data traffic node ports. With that, let's just go ahead and cancel this. We're going to click into our cluster and see what are the SLAs. The namespace of concern for us is Acme Fitness, and we can see that it's already protected by Acme SLA. If you were to look further into it and change anything about the management plan, you would click Manage Protection. You can choose different SLAs. In my case, I have a custom SLA which takes backups every 6 hours and will retain the backups for 30 days. With that, as we can see, there are 34 snapshots and more recent one is done today. And let's look at the application portal. There is a e-commerce application Acme Fitness, which really allows users to be able to buy fitness equipments, and there is a particular web page we are going to focus on product catalog. If we look at the underneath cluster infra config, here is what it looks like. If we go and say tell us all the details about Acme Fitness, we can see that there is a service called Catalog Mongo, there is a pod called Catalog Mongo, and there is a deployment called Catalog Mongo. What I'm going to do is delete the deployment which supports this product catalog and then simulate a data failure. So let's go ahead and delete the deployment called Catalog Mongo for Acme Fitness. So we have deleted the Catalog Mongo deployment. Let's go ahead and refresh this and see what really happens. So practically the site is down. Let's go ahead and try to restore this. In namespace view, we see that we have handful of snapshots taken. I'm going to take the most latest one and restore from there. Here I have a choice to mention whether I want to granularize the namespace level recovery or the PVC level recovery. I'm going to choose the entire namespace. Click next. Here it talks about whether I want to restore to same cluster or to the new namespace. Let's kickstart the recovery. And with that, what's really going to go is, as you can see, there are a handful of events here. The new event, as soon as it's ready, will show up here. While we wait for the event to show up, we can see that in normal recovery and backup scenarios, what it's doing is really taking a stock of what all are the objects, what all are the persistent volumes underneath, and bringing it back, restoring it, and eventually connecting all the config details to the application consistent view. We see that there is a new event. Let's go ahead and click that. So recovery has already started for the namespace Acme Fitness. It'll take a minute or two while the recovery starts. And as you can see, we can also take on-demand snapshots here, review the other snapshots. The other good thing about centralized control plane is that you can take a holistic view of all the events across the workloads, whether it is your Linux host, Kubernetes namespace, and also you can set up the report dashboard accordingly. You can have object capacity view versus what is a compliance view, and that's really powering the one global control plane across the workloads. That, let's see what is the status of our restore. We see that recovery is successful. Let's go back and refresh the application. Yes, our product catalog is resumed. And let's take a look at the cluster view. We can see that catalog Mongo deployment, catalog Mongo service is back. With that, we have simulated the data failure. We have also restored from the recent backup, and the restore to new namespace would be very similar to it. We can go ahead and start one of that. Let's go back to our namespace. Here, I'm going to take a recent backup and recover from that recent snapshot to a new namespace. So we have kickstarted a recovery process to new namespace, and it can be really used for portability purposes, where we want to create production environments, replica for staging, for dev or test environment, and it just is as smooth as we saw. With that, happy to take the further questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask this first question that we've received. So they ask, in a proper deployment of Kubernetes, one would never really want to back up the applications or the containers. And as a benefit to kill, spin up containers at any time, anywhere. So I see backup of data as very important, but a little confused of why I would want to back up an application or container.
Yes, great question. I think it's very general perception that Kubernetes is very stateless. Most applications we run there are resumable or recoverable just by spinning a new container. However, even in the most stateless applications, there is always some metadata, some data configs, application secret certificates, which are needed to be backed up time to time, depending on how recently the certificates or the configs were updated. And in terms of statefulness, if you look into the versions of different application versions, there is always a state to be maintained in terms of what really changed across the versions. And hence, stateful versus stateless applications, there is always, when you look deeper, there is always a collateral which needs to be established in terms of restoration process. So it's always a good practice if you want your business continuity and your application consistency to prevail. It's a good practice to really think about Kubernetes environment backup, which is more holistic, more application consistent.
So our next question reads, are these backups consistent?
Yes. So application consistency really comes in picture in terms of when your software binaries are in consistent version parity with everything else it takes to run your application smoothly. And we maintain it by really looking at the persistent volume state, the config state, the secret state, and all of the collaterals which are needed to keep the application consistent view. And they're all taken at the point in time when your SLAs are set up. And even when you take an on demand, we really take the point in time snapshot version of all the dependent application collaterals. So yes, they are application consistent. You can bring back your application to point in time when you really took the snapshot.
And how often are these backups? Done?
There are standard SLAs as well, which are recommended by Rubrik solution, gold and silver, and you can also create your custom SLAs. I normally prefer, depending on looking at your application and seeing is it a very transactional application or is it more data driven and data warehouse specific application. Based on the how often the data changes, you want to set it up. Let's say your data is highly OLTP based application. It's changing by the minute, by the second. You want to take it maybe at least in every hour basis. If it is a very data intensive and you don't see it's changing more or often, more than once a day, you want to set up at least at the midnight or less data peak time. So it depends on how soon and how much of the data is being changed in your application.
Perfect. So our next question reads, does this capture Kubernetes configurations such as pods or cluster configs?
It does. We take every periodic time instance, we are taking a backup of all the metadata at the Kubernetes master cluster level, which talks about the number of nodes, the number of dependent collaterals within the node, and taking the holistic picture of Kubernetes schema and taking the backup of all the underlying dependencies. So yes.
Perfect. So our next question reads, if containers are using NFS, can Rubrik back up those shares?
Yes, we do have a solution for backup in terms of NFS share backups, even within Kubernetes offering, and as well as we have NAS protection as well, where you can set up the backups and recovery process.
So it looks like we are starting to run low on questions. So I just want to remind the audience, go ahead and send those in. I do have one right here. And they ask, can Rubrik be used to back up any NFS shares outside of Kubernetes and the container environment?
Outside of Kubernetes environment, you probably want to use the NAS protection solution as I pointed. So yes, you can take a backup of your NFS shares outside of Rubrik environment.
Excellent. So I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. I'll go ahead and remind the audience.
Chat, I think in chat there is a question, unless we missed and we answered it.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Stephen Miller? Yep.
Yes. So Stephen asks, you're selling COTS software, not a service or environment. Is that correct?
I think that is correct way to look at it. We do have a SaaS-based solution, which means it's a Kubernetes protection by itself is a service. We can run this either in your native on-prem environment, and eventually we are also looking to provide this for the cloud-native workloads. In terms of what it would really entail is uh, running a CDM cluster off the cloud and taking a backup for your applications within the cloud account you may have. Um, so yes, it is a SaaS-based solution which is measured in terms of how many terabytes at the front end level we are able to protect.
All right. So while we wait for any more questions that might be coming in, I'll go ahead and announce our Amazon gift card winners. So the 4 winners of our $25 gift card drawing, our first winner is Avnish J. Our second winner is Lynn A. Our third winner is Ashley C. And our fourth winner is Cheryl Z. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see an email, just keep an eye on your spam folder. Now on to, so Stephen had a follow-up question, and it just says, in Azure Market.
So yes, we will be eventually we will be supporting cloud native solutions for Azure, AWS, and Google Kubernetes as well.
Well, perfect. That seems to be all of the questions that we've received throughout today's presentation. Christina and Rajni, I want to go ahead and just give you the floor to make any closing remarks, anything else that you'd like to say to our audience.
Yes, I think we're very excited to see such a huge turnout. That really solidifies the belief that containers are being heavily used, and as the applications get ported, modernized using containers, we want to be participating actively with our DevOps team and the players, and we want to know how your using of thinking containers, how you what is your biggest worry in terms of protecting applications and continuing the business as usual with container environment as well. And feel free to reach out to Rubrik team in terms of any question. It doesn't have to be just our product. It can be, what is your biggest worry? How do you want to think of containerization in your application domain?
And I'm going to say thank you for attending. It was pleasure to have you. Thank you for the questions.
Well, perfect. So I'll go ahead and close us out. I just want to give a quick reminder to our audience today that following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the on-demand. You can also find the recording living on the Security Boulevard website. You can just visit securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. Christina and Rajni, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, for putting together the demo and sharing your expertise. I'd like to thank Rubrik for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience, for being here with us today. Have a great day. Please fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thanks so much.